It's Thursday, December 15th, 2011. I'm Rim. There's no Scott because he's a bum, and this is Geeknights. Tonight, I talk a little bit about how I do the show.
Let's do this.
Funny, it almost sounded like Scott was here with me. Yeah, we're kind of lazy. It's the holidays. You're lucky there's any show up at all. We were just going to bail, but we decided, I don't know. It's been a while. Long time ago, we used to talk a lot more about what it is we do from the technical side, like how we make podcasts, how we do, well, I guess now videos and the servers and everything. But Scott was lazy, and I was actually feeling like doing something, so I decided to do the show by myself. A little quickie here, Geek Night special. So the way we record Geek Nights has come a long way. We've gone through like 4 different mixers and all these different microphones. It started way back before any of you listened. In fact, we never put these episodes publicly on the internet, anywhere that you would find them. They're out there still, but I believe the Google juice is actually at 0. I believe there is, in fact, no way to find the links to these MP3s. But Logitech Stick Mic was literally across the room. That was my idea of a compressor at the time. I would just have the stick microphone, the Omni microphone, sitting across the room, plugged into my Sound Blaster 16. I mean, technically it was a Sound Blaster Live, but there wasn't any substantial difference between that and the 16, at least as far as what I was doing. And we would just kind of talk and see how it went. It was awful. But now we're a little more sophisticated. I pretty much have maxed out the equipment I'm ever willing to spend on Geek Nights, the podcast or radio show. Partly because there's no reason to improve the technology. I think it sounds fine. I don't think any of you will complain about the audio, though if you want to, now is the time. I will preface this, however, with one final warning. This is not a typical episode of Geek Nights. There's usually another guy here. So if you randomly, from the bowels of the internet or My Little Pony or whatever, happen to stumble upon this show, and it happened to be this episode that you decided to pick up and listen to, us talking on the internet, the rest of the show's not really like this. It's actually quite different. So the microphones. We used to use, for the longest time, the Shure SM57s, which are actually technically instrument microphones as most people use them. It so happens that the President of the United States uses them and has used them for basically forever. They're an ancient microphone. The SM57 and the SM58 are pretty much functionally identical, except that the 58, with a little ball on the front, has some wind suppression and a little bit of pop suppression built into it. The 57 was chosen by the president not because it was better acoustically, but because it looked better on camera, and the windscreen that you could buy for it was actually very sleek looking. We do have one of those windscreens. You might see it in some of our very old videos that actually probably aren't on the internet anywhere you'd find them. But we've upgraded a little bit. I still use those, however. The 57s are invincible. I'll probably have them long after I'm dead. I'll stick them in my coffin. But whenever we have guests on the show, like Emily or Jared or Luke Crane or something, we give them those with or without pop filters, depending on who the person is, and depending on how much microphone discipline and plosiveness they have. I, however, am very fancy now. I'm speaking into a Shure Beta 87A, which is, 1, it requires phantom power. It's a condenser mic. And 2, unlike the 57s, which are cardioids, it's a hypercardioid. You can look up what that means, but basically it's ultra-directional, though there are a couple of drawbacks that don't really matter for our purposes. It mostly helps me drown out the echoes of me in Scott's microphone and vice versa. Scott, however, does not have the Beta 87A because he is a cheapskate, and he refused to pay for half of another 87A. So instead, I got him the Beta 58A, which is kind of like the reimagining of the SM58. It's also a condenser. It's got the ball. It's a great microphone. The only difference is that it's not a hypercardioid like the one I use. So this presents a problem sometimes. You might notice that when we do video like Radio Free Equestria, we still use the old SM57s. That's because if I'm recording actual stereo or anything where I'm going to keep the mix in any sort of stereo configuration, it's a billion times easier if both microphones are exactly the same and have the same profile, the same gain, everything. I also can't really do the XY stereo technique if the microphones are different for obvious reasons. At least I hope they're obvious. So the microphones are on booms, and they're connected to my mixer, which currently is a pretty old XENYX 1832. XENYX makes kind of shitty equipment. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. The preamps in this thing are not great. It's got a lot of problems all over, but for a show like this, it's fine. The difference between this and a so-called real preamplified system or a real mixer are negligible. You would never hear it, especially at the quality of MP3 we put out. And it has 6 actual preamplified microphone inputs, and coupled with the Firestudio and all the other inputs there, I could mic up about 12 people and I could record at least 9 of them simultaneously. You know, all multi-track and such. But the mixer I set up very particularly a long time ago. It took about a month of tweaking every day with the show and shouting into microphones and getting gain profiles and figuring out the optimal configuration. And I've marked it up with all the settings and what every channel is and what they're for and, you know, the buttons to hit for the submixes if I'm going to use Skype or anything. And I have not actually touched any of those settings in at least 2 years, short of the occasional time when we have someone on the show in the studio and I need to change the gain on whatever port I've plugged their particular microphone into. But suffice it to say, if you want to do radio or audio or podcasting of any kind, it's worth the trivial extra amount of money to get a real mixer. Once you have multiple buses to use, and inserts, you will never understand how you did anything without those things. For example, we can just Skype someone in trivially because I can send the audio from me and Scott directly to the Firestudio where I record, so, you know, you get pristine audio. I simultaneously send it to the bus that's connected to the other sound card that's going to Skype. The audio coming back from Skype goes into the mixer and goes into my main recording rig, but there's no overlap. So I have a Skype channel, a RIM channel, a Scott channel, and I can still have channels for every other individual person here. And I could actually have multiple Skypes or other sources all plugged in simultaneously. Now, very important, I have a pretty old Samson Scom Stereo Compressor. It's just a 2-channel compressor. I don't have it in linked mode, so it's basically 2 mono compressors. It also actually has an expander gate on it, which I use as an expander. Without getting into the details, it reduces the crosstalk between me and Scott while we're on the show. It kind of acts as a very subtle noise gate, and that's actually very important, especially with the high amount of compression that I apply to Geeknights later. Now, I'd experimented a bunch when I got a new Firewire recording thing with taking the SCOM out and recording directly because, you know, with the high bit rates I record at, I actually have a lot of headroom, even if there's no pre-record compression. But all the experimentation done, while I got a slightly richer sound if I bypass the somewhat old and somewhat cheap compressor, the benefits of having compression applied pre-record in terms of just the leeway I have with the signal after the fact, there was no legitimate reason to in any way consider trying to do all that in post. So the compressor has been set. I haven't touched any dial on that thing pretty much since I bought the new microphones, and I'm just going to leave it there. For those of you who don't know what I mean by an insert, basically the audio that I'm speaking, you know, I'm talking to a microphone right now. This little cable goes around the room, goes into one of the microphone channels, goes to a preamplifier, which has, I can set the gain on the preamp, which is independent of the gain on the fader, which is kind of like the volume control for the channel. The insert is between the fader and the preamp, so the signal is amplified up to line level with the preamp, and then it goes out to the compressor, which is actually above me. I'm looking at it right now, so I can see all the different, you know, how much compression is being applied at any given second, and how loud the signal is there compared to the signal on, say, the mixer or in the recording or all these other places. I have all these points where I can see the signal as it traverses my system. So it goes through the compressor, which I've set. Me and Scott have 2 different sets of settings that I wrote down in a notebook. I don't know where that notebook is, but I also have pencil markings on the compressor in case anyone ever fucks with it. And then it goes back to, you know, after it's been compressed, back to the mixer, and from there I can move the volume. And that's actually very important because that means that the compressor settings are always the same relative to the loudness of the bass audio, independent of where I move the volume slider. So if I need to make myself quieter, or I'm recording, you know, we have someone other than Scott on the show and I have to change the volume of that person absolutely, I don't have to also change the compression settings. The compression is the same no matter what. I'm just changing the volume of the kind of total signal at the end of that one channel. So all this happens, the compression, everything, it comes out of my mixer and it goes to 2 places. It could go to more places. I have 2 other things connected to this I'll get to in a second. One, I have a relatively new Firewire device that I use for recording. It's actually a Firestudio Mobile from Presonus. It's not great. It has a lot of problems I won't get into because you probably don't care, but I would not recommend using it for any ultra important or professional recording. It actually introduces a surprising amount of noise. It has some preamps and some microphone inputs. I don't use them because they're kind of flat sounding. I actually like the preamps on the XENYX better. And most importantly, the headphone jack is actually completely janky, and the right channel is absolutely louder than the left channel. I didn't notice that until it was too late to exchange the thing, and I have a feeling that it's a systemic flaw. I'm not going to worry about it, though. So anyway, it can record all these channels, so each channel of someone talking, some microphone input or some other input, maybe I'm, adding sounds to the show, or I'm bootlegging some audio out of Spotify or something through a sound card, through the mixer and back into the computer. But however I do it, each channel comes into Audition as its own channel. The Firestudio can do 8 channels just into it. They're all synced. Everything's nice, which means I have a lot of flexibility editing. And if you're going to ever edit audio with more than one person talking, you want to get to the point to where everyone's on their own channel as soon as possible. You'll never look back. But that's the main mix. That's what I'm recording. And my headphones plug into that just so I can hear exactly what I'm recording while I'm recording. Though, I actually don't wear headphones that often anymore when we record because, like I said, we don't change the settings much. It's not like me or Scott is going to sound different on any particular day. It's not like I have to master anything again. But the audio is piped to a Marantz that we've got, the PMD 660, which I don't think they manufacture anymore. I highly recommend this device over all other solid-state portable recorders. Every piece of remote audio you've ever heard us do, anytime we're interviewing people at conventions or there's some video and there's audio associated with that video, we always record it on the Marantz. But I didn't want to buy a Marantz just for that. It was pretty pricey, especially back before I was a Wall Street dude. So the Marantz is always on battery power and always plugged into the mixer. And it's always recording every second of audio that happens in the studio whenever anything's plugged in. If I turn anything on, I just record on the Marantz. It can record some ungodly number of days of audio if I need it to. And that way, if there's ever a power outage or something happens, maybe, I accidentally derp it and delete the file on Audition, or the computer crashes, I've always got another copy of the audio. We've lost maybe, 4 episodes of Geeknights ever due to mistakes. And the most recent one was sadly because while I had the Marantz, it was packed in a suitcase for a convention, and I was too lazy to go get it out and plug it back into the rig. And that happened to be the day that Audition crashed and fucked me. So on various buses, or one on the aux sends, and then I have another one on a sub bus, I have 2 kind of crappy old Behringer U-Control USB sound cards. And I use those for Skype or, connecting to another computer, or if I have to, for example, if I'm doing a streaming video or streaming audio of the show, I use that other sound card to do the stream independent of whatever I'm recording. Now, all these devices get the same final mix, so they get the exact same thing that's going into the computer for recording, with the exception that if there's more than 2 channels, it all gets kind of mixed together into 1 or 2 channels, depending on how I've set it up. So everything goes into Audition, and, I would have balked, and some of you might balk at paying for Adobe Audition when there's free tools like Resound or Audacity, but frankly, I've, for most of my life, been messing around with audio, and I've always used either Cool Edit or Cool Edit Pro or Cakewalk or some relatively good piece of software. And I have to say that Resound has all of the fiddly tools that I require to do audio mastering. It has good compressors, you can do really complex stuff, you have to really know what you're doing, and you have to have a neckbeard to be able to get the fucking thing to work. But it's really the only open source editing software that is worth a shit if you actually want to edit and master anything even reasonably professional sounding. Now, you might say, oh, Audacity, I use it. And you know what? Audacity's fine. For recording in a pinch, I'll use Audacity. It's installed on all my laptops and things. And for the longest time, I'd actually record in Audacity because it wasn't going to crash on me like Resound would. But then I'd export everything into Resound and do the mastering there, way back in the day when we recorded this on Linux. But Audacity's compressors and tools and mastering stuff, it's like baby's first audio software. It's, in my opinion, utterly unusable for any reasonable editing. Even of just 2 guys talking, I could not make a compressor set up to do what I wanted to do. It just didn't work. And while Resound could do it, it was a pain in the ass. So while Audition costs a lot of money, it's absolutely worth it. Though I don't think it'll ever be worth it to upgrade beyond 3.0, because 3.0 has everything you'll ever need. Unless you want to do surround sound for a movie, but that's not what I'm doing here. So I have a template project in Audition that has all of our stock sounds, me and Scott saying, let's do this, the little interstitial music between the different bits, a couple of commonly used effects and stingers and things that I throw in every now and then. And most importantly, it has the presets for, the audio that we actually, the mastering. It's not like I sit here and set up a compressor every time we record Geek Nights. On each channel for me and Scott, I have a noise gate in addition to the noise gate I got on the compressor. And some mastering, I raise the highs, lower the lows, tweak a little thing here or there. I remove the most annoying, sliver. I have a notch filter for me and a notch filter for Scott. I found the most annoying frequency in both of our voices and minimized them a little bit. I spent at least 2 months kind of perfecting these, and I'm kind of getting to the point where I want to change them around a little bit again, but I actually don't see any reason to right now. But imagine... Scott had to deal with this when we lived together in Beacon. He just hears me in the other room saying, testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I just listened to this in a loop while in real time applying different compression effects and different mastering effects until I got each channel just so. And then I'd take audio from people we'd interviewed in the past, and I'd try to make a generic one for, whenever we get someone on the show to at least give me a baseline to get started on. Though I will admit, whenever we have someone other than me or Scott on the show, I actually end up having to master their audio channel extremely heavily to make it sound like both of us. Partly because they don't swallow the microphone like we do, and also partly because their voices are usually really annoying sounding. But actually, I don't do that much in terms of mastering. I mean, the mastering itself, like the frequency up or down and all these little bits I do and a little bit of expansion, a little bit of compression is very fiddly, and it's just, you got to figure it out. There's no advice I can give you on that other than do what sounds good. And if you don't know what to do, look at what someone else did, copy it, and then figure out what you don't like about it and tweak it from there. And then at the end of the whole thing, the main mix, I just put a compressor at the top. I try to maximize myself and maximize Scott and maximize anyone on the show as much as possible. And then I have a pretty harsh compressor at the very end in case we both talk at the same time. It actually doesn't happen often enough for it to matter, but if you listen closely, whenever me and Scott are both yelling at the same time, there's a really harsh compressor that comes in. And occasionally we'll clip. I decided to let the risk of occasional clipping be there just to maximize the audio. So to actually record, we just sit down, we do the show, and I get this audio at the end. And you might be wondering, but Rim, you didn't say much about editing, and that's because we don't edit Geek Nights. We haven't edited Geek Nights to any substantial degree for at least 3 years. And partly that just came out of practice, but we sit down, we argue for a while about what the show's going to be on, and then we record, the it's date, year, whatever. I'm Rim. Scott says I'm Scott, and this is Geek Nights. Tonight we talk about whatever it is we're talking about. And then we stop, and then we, look at our news and make sure we got all our stuff together. And then we record the whole first half of the show in just one take. At best, I'll cut off maybe we stop talking about what we're talking about and we go on a little longer. I might cut us off a little early when I'm, quote, editing at the end. But otherwise, I don't even listen to what we did. We just put it up. And then we record the second half of the show. So pretty much the meta moment through the entire rest of the show, things of the day, everything all in one go. And that's it. Then, when we're all done, I just drag the interstitial audio in all the places it needs to be in. I actually used to, in the old days, have a little bit of a script that would, in Resound, do that automatically. It would take all those waves that we recorded, and it would put all the pieces in the right places based on percentage of audio that remained in the wave versus how much time I needed at the beginning of the fade in and the fade out. And it would basically construct an entire episode of Geek Nights automatically. In fact, it was even a batch to where we could record a whole bunch of individual bits, and I could just hit go, and then at the end, out would come 3 complete Geek Nights episodes ready to rock. But I drag these waves around, and then I just, export the thing to a wave, and that takes about 5 to 15 minutes. Depends if I add some filters, if we have a guest on, there's more audio. If it's a really long episode, it might take longer. I usually play Counter-Strike or something until it's done. And then I upload it, and we're done. We never listen to the episode again. We never think about it again. I put it on the website, put the news, thing of the day, all that stuff, and that's it. I dump a copy of the MP3 and a copy of the wave onto my NAS just for posterity. And all told, the process is actually pretty simple at this point. So I'd considered talking about how we do video too, but there's not that much to say, and we're actually changing our process constantly as I learn more about making video. So I'll give you the very quick version, and then we'll call it a night, because the whole reason we didn't do a real show is that we both wanted to bail. It wasn't just Scott. But I have a Panasonic HTC HS700, which I would argue is one of the best prosumer-level HD cameras on the market. It's got a hard drive in it. It'll record some ungodly amount of video and audio. It records 5.1 okay audio, but I always, like I said, use the Marantz to get the actual audio, and then I sync it up after the fact. The biggest thing is it records in 1080p, 60 frames per second, which means the video looks utterly fantastic, especially if I light everything right. Now, I do have 2 more cameras. I have an old flip camera that records 720p. It's not great. It has a lot of problems. The files it puts out actually are not standard MP4s, so I gotta basically transcode them to fix some timing artifacts. And if we really need a third camera angle, I have a Microsoft LifeCam that actually serves that purpose pretty well. And between those 3 things, I pretty much just stick around, throw video together, slap some audio on it, and throw it up. I actually don't do anything particularly special when it comes to video. Like when you see us doing convention stuff, camera on a tripod, just kind of pointed at us. Usually I don't even have multiple camera angles. I just fake it by, zooming in and out in post into the one camera angle just to kind of make the video a little dynamic. For more structured things like Radio Free Equestria, I just have a couple of best score, really cheap, they were like $100 each, LED light panels that give off a really harsh, really cold blue light. So I use those, and then I have a big halogen torchlight living room lamp that's bright enough to actually be my fill light. And it happens to have a reading light on it that's also halogen, and that reading light happens to be pointable like a spot, and the spot happens to have a really good white balance and provide great color. So between those and a little reflector for kind of a rim light on the back, get it? Rim light? That's it. I kind of just throw it together and do it. We put very little thought into it. I have a couple of audio panels just out of frame behind us to cut down on the echo because everything's hardwood in our apartment, and there's not much to say in terms of video. I just drag clips around in Premiere, hit export, and put it up with very little thought and very little consideration. Almost no mastering, and I haven't actually tried to do any compositing yet. And on that note, I think I'm done. I kind of want to go to bed. I can't believe you actually listened to this whole thing. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. It's very rare we talk about, how we do this stuff on the back end anymore. I will not help you with audio mastering because really you just have to learn it on your own. If you really want to learn it quickly, try to make a bunch of mixtapes. Try to take a bunch of songs and crossfade them all together and make it all sound great. And try to do it as fast as possible. And then start listening to those songs and listen to the mixtape over and over and over again and try to figure out, sit there listening to songs and looking at an equalizer and pick each channel one by one and maximize it and try to figure out what stuff is in that channel and then minimize it and try to figure out what stuff was in the channel that you didn't realize was in there before. And eventually you'll learn that every part of a graphic equalizer is a magic device that will make parts of your audio appear or disappear. And it's usually very specific things. There's certain particular ranges that sound really annoying in almost any person speaking, or there's a particular part that makes audio sound really loud and overbearing. There's a part you can raise a little bit that makes audio, especially voice, sound really crisp and really clear. Almost too crisp and too clear. And if you use that too much, you'll find that the audio actually becomes hard to listen to. People get tired listening to it, even though they couldn't really tell you why. So there's no way to teach it. Just fiddle with it, or wait until we have AI that does it. And hopefully next week we'll do normal episodes of Geeknights again. This has been Geeknights with Rim and Scott. Special thanks to DJ Pretzel for the opening music, Kat Lee for web design, and Brando K for the logos.
Be sure to visit our website at frontrowcrew.com for show notes, discussion, news, and more.
Remember, Geeknights is not 1, but 4 different shows. Sci-Tech Mondays, Gaming Tuesdays, Anime Comic Wednesdays, and Indiscriminate Thursdays.
Geeknights is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 license. Geeknights is recorded live with no studio and no audience. But unlike those other late shows, it's actually recorded at night.